Hello, Through It Therapistized Tribe. This is Craig Graves, your co-host, coming to you today on this Labor Day. I'm not sure when you're going to be listening to this, but at the present time, it is Labor Day 2019, and hope you're having a great Labor Day, whatever it is that you're doing today. So this episode, this little short comes to us from episode 4 on compound trauma. And in this little short, the episode was about compound trauma and how it relates to police shootings and those kind of things. But this little segment gives you a good idea on who can be affected by simple and complex trauma and what those two things are, and then who can be affected by PTS or PTSD. I've heard it called PTS on a lot of podcasts that I listen to these days. So this is a good little overview of those issues. What is simple? What is complex trauma? Who can be affected by PTSD? And you might be surprised at what Chris says here. It could be you. Simple things that you may not think would cause trauma or be trauma actually are. So here we go. It's about a 15-minute segment, and I'll see you guys on the other side.
So I'm going to make a simple argument. Here's my argument that I believe we really need to pay attention to. It is a crucial issue for really our whole society. I believe that, traumatic events have a cumulative effect on any individual that is enduring the traumatic events. And the effects need to be managed with an eye towards mental health of that individual on an individualized level. That's the belief I have. That's the argument I want to make. And I'm going to make a case for that.
Okay. I'll say that one more time if you don't mind, Chris, just so myself and perhaps the audience too is clear on what you're saying.
Traumatic events have a cumulative effect on any individual, and that those effects need to be managed with an eye towards mental health of that individual person.
Got it. So you're saying repeated traumatic events. So if we're talking about maybe not even police officers or first responders, but we hear so much about PSD in our military. PTSD, I'm sorry. But we hear so much about PTSD in our military. I mean, those guys, when they do a tour, however long that lasts, 6-8 months, a year, every day, a daily basis, they're getting hit with potentially death, at any moment. And so repeated cycles of this is what you're talking about, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's we're going to talk about that. And I want to make the point, maybe it's a good point to make now, that, we think of the military with PTSD. You think of the Vietnam guy who's living in the trailer, going crazy when he hears a gunfire from what is really a car backshot or
backfire.
Backfire.
Yeah, backfire.
That's something that we really think of. You think PTSD, boom, military, and that's not the case. We're going to talk about PTSD today, but it's the chronic and repeated danger of events, and it doesn't necessarily have to be PTSD. There's actually something called acute stress disorder that's sort of a watered-down version of PTSD.
Okay.
Not a lot of people realize that that's there. But even then, further down from that is just our human reactions when we see something crazy, something big, some sort of an event. And so police officers are every single day.
Yes.
They have that danger.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're risking their lives basically every day as well.
The military people might not even have that every day in some theaters.
Right.
So I'm just
talking about combat vets who've been exposed to the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq or something.
I'm not taking anything away from that, but I'm just making the point that we really need to change the narrative of trauma effect on military exclusively and put it really where it is importantly to understand right here at home on our daily streets, because every day they don't know what they face.
Right.
On any call.
And so PTSD, though, if we're talking about, I know our topic is police shootings and compound trauma, and perhaps you can define compound trauma for us in just a second. But really, what I've come to discover is PTSD is something, like you said, that anybody can be a victim of or
Craig,
have as a result of repeated trauma?
I have had, and it doesn't have to be repeated. It can be, we'll get to that simple trauma and compound trauma and the difference. But, people can have trauma from medical events. You go into a medical procedure, that really can be very traumatic.
Yes.
Or diagnoses.
Yes.
All you ladies out there, childbirth. There's a lot of experiences that we have in our daily lives that we really need to pay attention to.
Okay.
Let me tell you about a story.
All right.
So years ago, I was living in Chatham County. I moved out of West Virginia and went down to Chatham County.
Chatham County, North Carolina?
North Carolina,
okay.
Yes, sir. And my friend Pam and I, hey, Pam, if you ever hear this, I haven't talked to her in years. I wonder how she's doing. We went down to a conference. We have to do continuing education credits and, keep learning after we're licensed and everything. So we're down there doing this conference all day long. And, the conference is done. We hop back in the car, her and I, and we're driving home. It's probably about a 45-minute drive. So driving along the road, and many of you may have had a similar experience. We're driving normal pace. It's kind of a back road, so it's not heavily populated. And we drive up and we see this weird scene on the side of the road. There's a car. And there's a hazard light on. Like, oh, ooh. And so we slow down, we look at it. And, we quickly assess the scene as though there's a problem here. And there's not many people around. We need to stop. So we made the decision, kind of a Good Samaritan type thing, if you will. Let's see if we can be of any help. Dude, but the scene we stumbled upon was I forget how many people were there, two cars maybe a few more stopped after we were there. Looked down over the hill, and there's this car on its roof, upside down. Wheels were still spinning. We're like, oh my gosh. And I kind of look down, and there's there's a guy, I think, and he's got this lady in his arms, and they're coming up this big steep bank, and there's blood. I remember kind of. It was like, holy cow. I looked at Pam and asked her to get some towels or get something, and and I ended up being the guy who walked her up, handed her to me. I thought of first aid and whatever, so I kind of took her and kind of stabilized her neck a little bit, just kind of sat her down, and we're assessing, and somebody's screamed about the car still on, and is it going to blow up, and they go down. I don't know what they did, and I'm sitting there with this lady, and I'm sitting there face to face with this lady now, and she's got a phone, she's frantic. I'm trying to calm her down. My energies kick in, trying to figure out, all right, what do we need to do? How does this all work? What is the next step? What needs to happen? Talk to her husband on the phone. This was a big event, and those are I'll spare you all the further details, but the detail is important that she was ultimately okay, and nobody was hurt. The car didn't blow up, but as I said, many people may have had sort of experiences like this, right?
Yeah.
It was a very energizing, that's a key word, it was a very energizing experience. What do you do when you experience something like this? What happens?
Okay. So what kind of traumatic effect did this have on you? I mean, is this something you took away? That some kind of, explain more about how this was a traumatic event.
Anytime you come across something that's disturbing, anytime you come across something that you feel that elevated energy, you have markers. We have markers of things that we look for to assess what are the emotions, what are people experiencing. And these shows need to be longer, man. I swear we're going to try to keep them short because I want to spend a lot of time too, and we're probably not going to be able to get to it. How do you manage it? What do you do? There's a natural question at the end of this. What are we supposed to do with police officers and all these first responders? And there's a lot to that. Get attention to it is the main idea today.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're looking at some of the, let's look at defining some of these things and, what is it that we're talking about? Trauma. You were just asking me that. So I Googled and prepared some stuff, from my experience and what I've seen and what's written. And I guess I want to try to do a quick, Trauma 101 class to present some things so we have some language.
That's a great idea.
APA, you ever heard of APA?
I don't think I have.
They're the big
Some
body
medical
in the
thing?
mental health field, the American Psychological Association. And we all have associations. Social workers have associations too. It's called the NASW, National Association of Social Workers. All these legal and groups of people, counselors have their boards and they have their association, but a lot of times you'll follow APA, American Psychological Association. They define trauma as a person's emotional response to an extremely negative, disturbing event. Traumatic event, thus, would be any event that causes trauma. Okay. This episode is talking about compound trauma. We were talking earlier today, you came up with, what did you find?
Yeah, when I Googled compound trauma, most of the things that came back were complex trauma.
Complex is another way of
Yes.
referring to it. Combined trauma, people have said. So a lot of those terms are really synonymous. Compound trauma just means that you've had one traumatic event in your life followed either months or years by another, and then maybe another and another.
Okay.
Yeah. Typically people, unless they have a special circumstance, like we're talking about the violence with police and shootings and stuff, you won't have that many traumatic events. You may have a few. If you come from a rough family or you have bad mental health background that causes a lot of problems, you may have more than a few. Compound trauma with people that we're talking about with all the violence and the elevated emotion that kicks up is really like, as you can imagine, many, 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 many. And oh my gosh, that is so complicated to deal with. Therapy fact: simple trauma is easy to treat, whereas compound trauma is very hard. We all know that as professionals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it's extremely compounded. Like I said, for instance, like over a career,
Mm-hmm.
So we know in therapy world, it's been research and science studied, that simple trauma is just a traumatic event. That's really not that hard to deal with, even in a situation where it's a crazy event. I mean, you are abducted, you are taken as a child, you are hurt sexually, you are buried in a pit, eating bugs, not knowing anything for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even a month until you're found. I mean, that's a crazy, doesn't happen very often event, but that is simple trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That sound crazy? Simple trauma.
Simple trauma.
Because what we do in therapy is we recover from those events, we reorganize thoughts, we manage emotions, we de-escalate the energy that you feel on it. And when we're dealing with just one, even when it's a really big one like that, believe it or not, it's not that complicated. It's not that hard. But when you've got an event and then another event, even it's similar, and then another event and then another event, well, whoa, you've got emotional layering, you might think of it, that it just gets more and more and more embedded into, you might say, a worldview of a person.
Mm-hmm.
So compound trauma can be very difficult to treat, very resurfaces. It embeds itself into the foundations of the way that you operate in relationships in your day-to-day life. That's a very important thing that we understand, the difference between simple trauma and compound or complex trauma.
So just so we're clear, simple trauma is a one-time event. Compound trauma is multiple events maybe on a consistent basis, but at least over a period of time. It's not just one single event.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So there we have it. Trauma. Simple trauma, complex trauma, compound trauma, PTSD. It's not just military, police, first responders that can be affected by trauma, and they definitely are. And Chris makes a pretty good case about compound trauma being harder to treat than simple trauma. So if you're in one of those situations, police officer, first responder, military, where you're constantly bombarded by traumatic events, it may be a good idea to start talking about these issues and not let these things build up, and get out in front of it. Because as he said, as time goes on, compound trauma becomes harder and harder to treat. But I think another one of the takeaways from that is, from this little short, is you can be affected by different types of trauma. Chris mentioned medical events or other devastating events that can lead to PTS or PTSD. and it's better to get out in front of these things as opposed to having them build up. So I would encourage you to think about how you've been affected by trauma and how you've dealt with that thing in the past, and then maybe how you want to deal with it going forward or in the present. And if appropriate, then I would say reach out to somebody and get some help, okay? So I also wanted to tell you one more thing while we're here. We've got a new way to support the show, Chris and I do. We want to do some things. We want to continue to advertise, and we want to invest in some video equipment. And we've talked about the donate button that's on the website, but we've got a new we've got a new partner, if you will, Whole Family Products. And Whole Family Products, they provide natural health supplements, CBD oil, CBD cream, natural hormone creams, and a lot of other things. There's over 126 products on their website. And I've known these guys for a long time. I used to run an Amazon business where I would buy products wholesale and then flip them on the internet. And so I've known Brenda and also Elizabeth over there at Whole Family Products for a long time. Great products, guys. We've done a show on CBD, if you haven't heard that one yet. So they're offering CBD supplements. There's a sleep supplement out there, and then other natural hormone creams that are really high quality type products. So if you go to our website, throughwhattherapists.com, there is a link on there to the Whole Family Products website. And the way it works is if you do go to their website and buy products, then Chris and I, the Through What Therapist Does podcast, will get a commission from that. So be sure to go to our website first and then click on the Whole Family Products graphic under the Our Sponsor section on our website so that Chris and I will get credit for that sale. Okay? Again, as always, guys, I'd love to hear your feedback. You can go to the website and click on the Contact Us link, or you can shoot Chris an email directly at contact@throughwhattherapists.com. So we'd love to hear from you. And as always, we really appreciate you guys listening, and we'll be talking to you real soon.